You miserable son of a bitch. I gave you my heart, I gave you my soul, I gave you my body, and you just threw me aside like I was some piece of garbage.
Yeah, my bad.
For 12 seasons, one sitcom ruled Monday nights on CBS. It made a struggling network powerhouse rich, turned a working actor into the highest-paid man on television, and gave millions of viewers a weekly dose of dysfunctional family comedy wrapped around a beach house in Malibu. Then, in its final moments, that same show ended with something no one expected: a piano falling out of the sky and crushing its lead character to death. To casual viewers, it looked like a strange, dark joke. To anyone who had followed the show's real-life drama for the previous 4 years, it looked like something else entirely: a message. This is the story of how a hit sitcom turned its own finale into a farewell shot at the man who used to be its biggest star, and why that ending effectively closed the book on the franchise for good. 2.5 Men premiered on CBS in the fall of 2003. Created by Chuck Lorre and Lee Aronson, the show followed a jingle writer named Charlie Harper, a womanizing bachelor living a carefree life in a beachfront house, whose world is turned upside down when his uptight, recently divorced brother Alan and Alan's young son Jake move in with him. The premise was simple, but the execution clicked. Charlie Sheen, cast as Charlie Harper, brought an effortless charisma to the role that critics often dismissed as lazy but audiences found irresistible. John Cryer, playing the neurotic, perpetually unlucky Alan, provided the perfect comedic foil. Angus T. Jones, cast as young Jake, rounded out the trio and grew up in front of the camera over the course of the series. Within a few seasons, 2.5 Men wasn't just a hit, it was one of the most watched comedies on American television, regularly pulling in over 15 million viewers a week at its peak. It made money not just for CBS but for Warner Brothers Television, which produced it and later syndicated it into a lucrative rerun package that aired constantly on cable well into the 2010s. And at the center of all of it was Charlie Sheen, whose off-screen persona increasingly began to blur with his on-screen character. Audiences didn't quite know where Charlie Harper ended and Charlie Sheen began, and for years, that ambiguity was part of the show's appeal. But by 2010, the arrangement that had made everyone rich was starting to strain. Sheen's personal life had spiraled into a series of public incidents, arrests, hospital visits, tabloid headlines, that would have ended most actors' careers outright. Instead, because the show was such a massive earner for both the network and the studio, production continued largely unaffected. When Sheen's contract came up for renewal that year, he leveraged the show's dependence on him to negotiate one of the largest per-episode salaries in television history, reportedly close to $2 million an episode once bonuses and profit participation were factored in. It was a deal that made him, briefly, the best-paid actor on television. It also planted the seeds of resentment that would eventually blow the whole thing up. The unraveling happened fast, and it happened in public. In January of 2011, after a string of erratic incidents including a widely reported hotel room episode in New York, CBS and Warner Brothers made the decision to suspend production entirely so that Sheen could seek treatment. Rather than using the break to quietly recover, Sheen instead launched into a series of talk radio interviews and television appearances that became instant pop culture events. He described himself as having tiger blood, claimed to have cured himself through sheer will, and openly mocked the idea that he needed help. In one of those interviews, he turned his frustration directly on the show's creator, Chuck Lorre, hurling insults that crossed a line the studio wasn't willing to overlook, not because of the mockery itself, but because of how personal and public it had become. By early March of 2011, Warner Brothers had seen enough. The studio terminated Sheen's contract, ending his run as the face of one of the most successful sitcoms in television history. It was a costly decision. The remaining episodes of that season were scrapped, hundreds of crew members were left without work for months, and the studio absorbed losses estimated in the tens of millions of dollars. Sheen, for his part, didn't go quietly. He filed a lawsuit against Warner Brothers and Lorre seeking well over $100 million in damages, arguing that the firing was unjustified. The dispute eventually moved to private arbitration, as his contract required, and by the fall of 2011 the two sides had reached a confidential settlement rumored to be worth tens of millions of dollars to Sheen, even though he would never appear on the show again. That left CBS and Warner Brothers with an urgent, very public problem. How do you keep a hit show alive after firing its lead actor in the most explosive celebrity flame out of the decade? The search for a replacement was chaotic behind the scenes. Talks with another prominent actor to take over the lead role reportedly fell apart at the last minute over creative differences, leaving producers scrambling just days before their annual presentation to advertisers, an event where networks are expected to show off their fall lineups with confidence. In the end, Ashton Kutcher stepped in, signing on for a season at a fraction of what Sheen had been earning, but still one of the largest deals for a sitcom actor at the time. His arrival was announced with just enough time to spare before the network had to face Madison Avenue. Kutcher's introduction to the show, in the fall of 2011, was handled with a mix of dark comedy and showmanship that set the tone for everything that followed. The season premiere opened with the funeral of Charlie Harper, revealed to have died after being struck by a train in Paris, an ending so absurd and abrupt that it read less like closure and more like a wink at the audience. Into that vacuum stepped Kutcher's character, a heartbroken tech billionaire who buys the beach house and slowly becomes part of Alan and Jake's lives. It was a clever pivot, essentially building a brand new show inside the shell of the old one, and it worked well enough to keep 2.5 Men on the air for 4 more seasons. But the show that continued after 2011 was never quite the same cultural phenomenon it had been. Ratings, while still respectable, never approached the heights of the Sheen era. Angus T. Jones, who had grown from a child actor into a young adult over the course of the series, became increasingly uncomfortable with the material he was performing. In 2012, he made headlines of his own when he appeared in a video for a religious organization, publicly criticizing the show he starred in and urging viewers to stop watching it. It was a stunning moment, a lead actor denouncing his own series while it was still airing, and it deepened the sense that the show's original identity had permanently fractured. Jones apologized for the way his comments landed but stood by his underlying concerns, and his role on the show was steadily reduced until he left the main cast entirely before the 11th and final season began. By the time 2.5 Men reached its 12th season in 2014 and 2015, it was a very different animal from the show that had premiered over a decade earlier. Kutcher and Cryer carried the final stretch, with Jones appearing only sparingly. CBS knew the show's ending would be a major television event regardless of its ratings slide, if only because of the sheer soap opera history behind it, and the network built a promotional campaign designed to keep audiences guessing about how it would all wrap up. Speculation ran wild that Charlie Sheen himself might make a surprise appearance in the finale, a rumor the show's stars and producers deliberately declined to confirm or deny in interviews leading up to the broadcast. The finale aired in February 2015, drawing one of the show's largest audiences in years, driven almost entirely by curiosity about how the story of Charlie Harper, and by extension, the story of Charlie Sheen's fall from grace, would finally be put to rest. What viewers got was not a sentimental send-off but a bizarre, almost aggressive piece of meta-comedy. A mysterious man, his face obscured, walks up to the familiar beach house and rings the doorbell. Before he can be seen clearly, a full-size grand piano drops from above and crushes him instantly. The moment is played completely straight, with no explanation given as to who the man actually was, leaving the door open for the audience to assume it was meant to represent Charlie Harper, or Charlie Sheen himself. Then came the moment that turned an odd joke into a message. The camera pulls back to reveal Chuck Lorre, the show's real-life creator, sitting casually in a chair, watching the scene unfold. He turns to the camera, utters the word "winning," the exact catchphrase Sheen had made infamous during his 2011 meltdown, and is immediately crushed by a second falling piano. In a matter of seconds, the show had taken direct aim at the man whose firing had once threatened to end it, delivering what many viewers and critics interpreted as a scripted, on-camera act of revenge, for years in the making. It was petty, it was dark, and it was unmistakably deliberate. The reaction was immediate and divided. Some viewers and critics saw it as a genuinely funny, self-aware final punchline, a fitting way for a show built on chaos to go out on its own terms. Others found it mean-spirited, arguing that turning the finale into a jab at a specific real person felt beneath even a show as unapologetically crude as this one had always been. Entertainment outlets spent days dissecting the scene, debating whether it was clever meta-commentary or simply Chuck Lorre settling an old score in front of 13 million witnesses. Whatever the intent, the ending accomplished something rare for a long-running sitcom. It made the finale itself the story, more talked about than almost any single episode in the show's 12-year run. That scene effectively closed the door on any future for the franchise. It wasn't a lawsuit, a ratings collapse, or a network decision that killed off 2.5 Men for good. It was the finale's own ending, which made clear that reconciliation between the show's creative leadership and its original star was, at best, complicated, and that the show had no intention of pretending otherwise. In the years since, cast members have occasionally been asked about the possibility of a revival or reboot, and the responses have been consistently lukewarm. Jon Cryer has spoken about the lingering strain from the show's later years, acknowledging that Sheen's behavior during that period left a mark that hasn't fully faded, even as he's wished his former co-star well personally. Chuck Lorre and Sheen did eventually work together again on another television project, suggesting the professional relationship wasn't permanently destroyed, but the old tension has never entirely disappeared from public conversation. There are also practical reasons a true revival seems unlikely. The cast has scattered into very different chapters of their careers. Sheen has spent the years since his firing trying to rebuild his professional reputation, taking smaller roles and occasionally reflecting publicly on how badly he mishandled the situation at the time. Cryer built a strong post-show career, picking up major awards recognition and moving into other genres before returning to sitcom leads. Jones stepped almost entirely away from acting, focusing on education and his personal beliefs, only reappearing in the industry in minor capacities years later. Kutcher, meanwhile, became known as much for his technology investments as for his acting work, occasionally returning to comedic roles but never treating 2.5 Men as a chapter he needed to revisit. There's also the matter of the show's content itself. A significant portion of 2.5 Men's humor was built around Charlie Harper's womanizing and a steady stream of jokes about casual sex, drinking, and reckless living. What played as harmless, cheeky comedy in the mid-2000s reads very differently to modern audiences, and any attempt to revive the format would almost certainly require a substantial creative overhaul just to avoid feeling dated or out of step with current sensibilities. Combined with the financial reality that reviving an expensive multi-camera sitcom in today's fragmented television market is a much harder sell than it once was, most of the practical arguments point toward 2.5 Men staying exactly where its finale left it. In the end, the falling piano wasn't just a punchline, it was a full stop. It took a show that had spent 4 years quietly working through the fallout of its most famous meltdown and gave that story its final word, on camera, in front of the largest audience the series had drawn in years. Whether you read it as a clever piece of self-referential comedy or as an act of on-screen payback dressed up as a joke, the message was clear. This chapter of television history was closed, and it was being closed on the creators' terms, not the fired stars. 12 years, hundreds of episodes, and one of the most expensive contract disputes in TV history all came down to 2 pianos and 15 seconds of screen time, and that, more than any ratings chart or lawsuit settlement, is why 2.5 Men never really had a path back to the air.